Welcome to the Life Story 999 channel. In today's story, a young homeless girl finds the lost documents of a wealthy millionaire. Instead of asking for money, she makes an unexpected request that leaves the millionaire speechless. Stay tuned to hear this heartwarming journey of transformation and the surprising bond that forms between two unlikely people. If you enjoy this story, please like the video, leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales. Emma, a young woman of just 20 years, had faced more challenges in her short life than most could imagine. Life on the streets had been harsh and unforgiving, and every day was a battle to survive. But today, something felt different. It was a sunny afternoon in a bustling American city, and Emma clutched a large envelope tightly against her chest as she made her way through the crowded sidewalks. She could feel the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders, and yet, for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. This envelope might just be her ticket to a new beginning. Emma approached a pair of grand iron gates that led to an imposing mansion. Her heart pounded in her chest, both from fear and anticipation. She took a deep breath to steady herself, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and then opened them, gazing up at the mansion that loomed before her. Somewhere inside was a wealthy man named Victor, the owner of the very documents she had found. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she was determined not to let her fear hold her back. Summoning every ounce of courage, Emma pressed the doorbell. The sound echoed through the spacious property, and she could almost hear her own heartbeat in the silence that followed. Moments later, the heavy wooden door slowly opened, revealing a tall woman with a stern face. She wore a neat, pressed uniform and had an air of authority about her. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hamilton, looked Emma up and down, her eyes filled with suspicion. "What do you want?" Mrs. Hamilton asked sharply, her voice filled with disdain. Emma swallowed her nerves, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to speak with Mr. Victor," she said. "I have something important for him. Some documents that belong to him." Mrs. Hamilton eyed Emma for a long moment before letting out a derisive laugh. "Mr. Victor doesn't have time for beggars," she snapped. "If you're here looking for money, you're wasting your time. Go find a job." With that, the housekeeper began to close the door. But Emma reacted quickly, stepping forward and wedging her foot in the doorframe before it could shut. Her heart pounded as she looked Mrs. Hamilton straight in the eye, her expression resolute. "I'm not leaving until I deliver these documents," Emma said, her voice carrying a tone of desperation and determination. "They're important, and Mr. Victor needs to see them." The housekeeper paused, clearly taken aback by the young woman's boldness. There was something in Emma's eyes, a raw determination that spoke of someone who had nothing left to lose. After a moment, Mrs. Hamilton huffed in annoyance and stepped back from the door. "Wait here," she said, her voice still dripping with irritation. Without another word, she turned and disappeared into the depths of the mansion. Emma stood on the doorstep, her heart racing. She had no idea what awaited her, but she knew that whatever happened next, she was ready to face it. Victor, a tall and elegant man in his mid-40s, appeared at the door, his brow furrowed in irritation. He eyed Emma with suspicion, his gaze a mix of distrust and curiosity. He was used to dealing with all kinds of people, but this young woman standing at his door was unlike any he had encountered before. "What is all this commotion about?" Victor asked impatiently, his voice edged with annoyance. He clearly did not appreciate having his routine disturbed. Emma took a deep breath and held out the envelope. "I found your documents," she said, her voice trembling but steady. She hoped he would understand how important this was. Victor narrowed his eyes as he took the envelope from her, his skepticism evident. He opened it and began flipping through the papers inside. His expression shifted from irritation to surprise as he recognized the documents. These were crucial papers, ones he thought were lost forever. "Where did you find these?" Victor demanded, his tone sharp. He wasn't sure if he was more surprised by the fact that the documents were in front of him or by the person who had returned them. Emma stood her ground, her chin lifting slightly. It doesn't matter where I found them. What matters is that they're yours, and I knew they were important, she replied. She kept her eyes locked on his, trying to convey her sincerity. Victor's lips curled in a sneer. People like you don't end up with documents like this, he said coldly. Are you trying to con me? If you're here for money, go get a job. Emma felt her cheeks flush with a mix of frustration and determination. She had expected this kind of reaction, but she wasn't about to be dismissed so easily. I'm not leaving until you take these documents seriously, she said firmly. Her voice held an edge of desperation, but there was also strength there, the kind of strength that came from surviving on her own for so long. They mean something to you, and I'm doing the right thing by bringing them back. Victor paused, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. There was something in her expression, honesty, perhaps, or maybe just sheer stubbornness, that made him hesitate. He had encountered all sorts of people trying to swindle him over the years, but there was something different about this young woman. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. Fine, he said, his voice still tinged with irritation. Come in. We'll discuss this inside. Emma followed Victor through the grand entryway of the mansion. She couldn't help but feel small and out of place among the opulence that surrounded her. The marble floors gleamed under the bright chandelier, and the walls were adorned with expensive artwork. She swallowed her nerves, determined to stay focused on why she was there. Victor led her into a sitting room and gestured toward an armchair. Sit, he ordered curtly, while he settled himself on a larger, more elaborate chair across from her. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, still holding the envelope. His eyes bored into hers, full of questions. Now, he said, his tone commanding, explain to me exactly how you came into possession of these documents. Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She took a deep breath and began to speak. I was walking through an alley a few days ago, and I saw a pile of trash. I noticed something unusual sticking out of it, and when I picked it up, I realized it was this envelope with your name on it, she explained. She spoke calmly, but inside, she was anything but calm. She knew this was a pivotal moment. Victor could either trust her or throw her out. Victor listened without interrupting, though his expression remained hard to read. After a few moments of silence, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers thoughtfully against the armrest. So, you expect me to believe that you just found these lying around and decided to bring them back, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Emma nodded. Yes, I knew they had to be important, and I thought it was the right thing to do, she said. There was a quiet sincerity in her voice, a genuine honesty that was impossible to fake. Victor studied her for another long moment, and for the first time, something in his expression softened. He set the envelope down on the table beside him and sighed. You know, I could have you thrown out for trespassing, he said, though his tone lacked the bite it had earlier. Emma swallowed hard, her gaze unwavering. I know, she replied, but I had to try. I thought you'd want them back. Victor rubbed his temples, as if trying to make sense of the situation. Finally, he looked up at her again, his expression more contemplative than hostile. You're a strange young woman, he said. Most people would have just kept walking. Emma managed a small smile, her heart pounding. I guess I'm not most people, she said quietly. Victor stood up abruptly, and Emma flinched slightly, unsure of what he was going to do. He walked over to a cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a small ornate box. He returned to where Emma sat and handed it to her. Here, he said, his voice softer now. I suppose I should thank you for your honesty. Emma took the box, her eyes wide with surprise. What is this? She asked. Victor shrugged. Just a gesture. Open it later, he said, his gaze softening slightly. For now, I suppose I owe you a conversation. Come, let's talk properly. He motioned for her to follow him into another room, a large study lined with bookshelves. The atmosphere was different here, quieter, almost intimate. Emma felt her nerves settle, just a little. Victor gestured for her to sit again, this time in a chair opposite a large desk. He sat behind it, resting his hands on the polished wood surface. "Why did you really come here?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. "You must want something." Emma hesitated. She took a deep breath, then said, "All I want is a chance. A chance to prove that I'm more than what people see. A beggar, someone with nothing. I thought returning these might be a way to show that." Victor was silent for a long moment, his eyes locked on hers. Finally, he nodded, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," he said. "All right, let's see what you're really made of." Emma stepped cautiously into the luxurious mansion, feeling completely out of place amidst the opulence. The grand artwork that adorned the walls, the polished wooden furniture, and the luxurious fabrics all seemed to emphasize her own insignificance. She was acutely aware of how out of place she was, but she was determined not to let that bother her. Victor led her through the ornate hallway into a lavishly decorated living room, where he pointed to a plush couch. "Sit down," he said tersely, his voice as stern as his gaze. Emma nodded, moving to sit on the couch, her eyes darting around the room as she took in the grand surroundings. Everything here spoke of wealth, power, and privilege, things she had never known. Victor remained standing for a moment, looking at her as though deciding what to make of her. He then sat across from her, his posture straight, his expression still guarded. "Now, explain how you found these documents," he said, gesturing towards the envelope she had handed him. Emma took a deep breath, willing herself to remain calm. "I was walking down the street and found them in a pile of trash," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I recognized your name and address, so I thought I should return them." Victor raised an eyebrow, his skepticism still evident. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. After a beat, he pulled out his wallet, opened it, and began writing a check. "How much do you want for returning these?" he asked, his voice indifferent. Emma's eyes widened, and she shook her head vigorously. "I don't want money," she said firmly. Victor looked up from his checkbook, a puzzled expression crossing his face. "Then what do you want?" he asked, his tone now tinged with genuine curiosity. Emma hesitated, her hands clasped together in her lap. This was the moment she had been building herself up for, but now that it was here, she found it hard to find her voice. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but determined. "I want you to treat me like a daughter, just for a week." Victor blinked, clearly stunned. "What?" he asked, leaning back in his chair as if he hadn't heard her correctly. Emma nodded, her eyes glistening. "I've never had a family. I want to know what it feels like to have a father, even if it's just for a short time," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She looked up at Victor, her gaze imploring. Victor was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on her. He seemed to be trying to process what she had just said. He had expected her to ask for money, or maybe for some kind of favor. But this was different. It was unexpected, and it took him a moment to wrap his mind around it. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer. "You want me to treat you like a daughter?" "For a week," he repeated, still trying to grasp the concept. Emma nodded again, her gaze never wavering. "Yes," she whispered, "just for a week. I just want to know what it's like." Victor leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he thought. The room fell silent, the only sound the faint ticking of an ornate clock on the mantel. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for his response. She knew her request was unusual, and she had no idea how he would react. After what felt like an eternity, Victor finally nodded. "Very well," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful. "For 1 week, I will treat you like my daughter." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief, a mixture of relief and joy washing over her. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. Victor gave her a small, almost reluctant smile. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This will be An adjustment for both of us. He stood up, signaling that their conversation was over. We start tomorrow, he added, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and something else, something softer. Emma nodded, rising from the couch. Thank you, Mr. Victor, she said again, her voice filled with sincerity. Victor waved his hand dismissively. We'll see how this goes, he said, turning and heading towards the door. He paused and looked back at her. You can stay in one of the guest rooms tonight. I'll have Mrs. Hamilton show you the way. Emma nodded, her heart swelling with hope. For the first time in a long time, she felt as though she had a chance to feel what it was like to belong, even if just for a little while. As she followed Mrs. Hamilton up the grand staircase, she couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, something better. The next day, Victor introduced Emma to his wife, Clarissa. Clarissa was less than thrilled with the idea of a stranger living in their home, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of the young woman standing beside her husband. She extended a polite but cold smile, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. This is Emma, Victor said, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. She'll be staying with us for a week. Clarissa glanced at Victor, her brow furrowing slightly. I see, she said, her tone carefully measured. She turned to Emma, her gaze sharp. Welcome, I suppose. But let's make one thing clear. I don't tolerate nonsense in my home. Emma nodded, her eyes dropping to the floor. I understand, she replied softly. Victor could sense the tension, but he was determined to make this work. He led Emma through the house, showing her the different rooms, introducing her to the household staff, and trying his best to make her feel comfortable. Despite the grandeur of the mansion, there was an unmistakable warmth to the way Victor treated Emma, something that started to chip away at her nerves. This is your room, Victor said, opening a door to reveal a cozy guest room. The bed was large, draped in soft linens, and a window looked out onto the garden below. Emma took in the sight, her heart swelling with a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She had never slept in a room so beautiful before. Thank you, Mr. Victor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor gave her a gentle smile. You're welcome, Emma. And please, just call me Victor. Over the next few days, Victor made an effort to include Emma in the daily activities of the household. He invited her to join them at meal times, introduced her to the staff by name, and took her on walks around the expansive garden. He even brought her to his home office, showing her the kind of work he did. Emma listened intently, fascinated by the details of his business. Slowly, she began to feel like she was part of something, even if just temporarily. In those quiet moments spent in the garden or during a casual conversation over breakfast, Victor and Emma began to form a genuine bond. He asked her about her past, and although Emma was hesitant at first, she eventually opened up, telling him about her struggles and the hardships she had faced. Victor listened with empathy, and in return, he shared some of his own life experiences, his successes, his regrets, and even his fears. Emma found herself feeling something she had not felt in a long time: trust. But while Victor was doing his best to make Emma feel at home, Clarissa remained distant. She was polite but cold, her eyes often lingering on Emma with suspicion. At first, Emma tried to ignore it, telling herself that Clarissa just needed time to get used to her presence. But as the days went by, the tension became more palpable. One evening, during a particularly tense dinner, Clarissa could no longer contain her skepticism. She put down her fork, her gaze fixed on Emma. So, Emma, she began, her voice dripping with suspicion, tell me, what exactly do you expect to gain from all of this? You come into our home, and my husband is suddenly treating you like family. What's your angle? Emma felt her face flush, her hands trembling slightly as she placed her fork down. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I'm not trying to gain anything, Mrs. Clarissa, she said, her voice soft but steady. I just wanted to know what it's like to be part of a family. That's all. Clarissa raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a disbelieving smile. A family? You think you can just waltz in here and be a part of our family? It's not that simple, dear. Victor shot Clarissa a warning glance. Clarissa, that's enough, he said, his voice firm. But Clarissa wasn't finished. No, Victor. I want to understand why she's really here. What kind of person does something like this without expecting something in return? Emma swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. She had anticipated resistance, but the hostility in Clarissa's words cut deeper than she expected. She fought to keep her voice steady as she responded. I don't want money or anything else, Emma said, her eyes meeting Clarissa's. I've spent my entire life alone. I just wanted to know what it's like not to be... For a moment, silence fell over the dining room. Victor looked at Emma, his heart aching for her. He reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. Emma, you're welcome here, he said gently. I promised you a week, and I intend to keep that promise. Clarissa huffed, shaking her head. Fine, but don't expect me to play along with the charade, she muttered before getting up and leaving the table. Emma watched her go, her heart heavy but grateful for Victor's support. She turned to Victor, her voice trembling. Thank you, Victor. I really appreciate it. Victor smiled at her, a warmth in his eyes that reassured her. You're a part of this household now, Emma. Even if it's just for a short while, he said. As the night went on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of unease that Clarissa's words had left behind. But Victor's kindness gave her hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a place where she belonged, even if it was only for a fleeting moment. One sunny afternoon, Emma decided to take a stroll through the city, enjoying the brief respite from the tension back at the mansion. As she walked down a busy street, she heard a familiar voice call her name. Turning around, she saw Mark, an old friend from her days on the streets. His face lit up with a smile, and Emma felt a surge of warmth at seeing a friendly face. Emma, I can't believe it's you, Mark exclaimed, hurrying over to her. Where have you been? You look different, he added, eyeing her clean clothes and tidier appearance. Emma smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. It's a long story, Mark. I've been staying with someone for a while, trying to figure some things out. Mark raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, he asked, do you still have that photo you showed me a while back? The one of that lady. Her name was Clarissa, right? Emma frowned, nodding slowly. Yes, why? She asked, curiosity piqued. Mark's expression turned serious. I think I saw her a few days ago, late at night. She was near that alley where you found those documents you were talking about. He paused, studying Emma's reaction. She was acting strangely, looking over her shoulder, and she tossed something into a dumpster. It seemed off to me. Emma felt her stomach drop, her heart pounding with sudden anxiety. Clarissa? Are you sure it was her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded. Yeah, I'm sure. It was definitely her. Emma's mind raced. Could Clarissa have been involved in the disappearance of Victor's documents? It seemed impossible, and yet the pieces were starting to fit together. She knew she had to tell Victor what she had just learned, even if it meant stirring the pot even further. That evening, Emma returned to the mansion, her heart heavy with the news she had to share. She found Victor in his study, poring over some paperwork. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly on the door. Victor looked up, his face softening when he saw her. Emma, come in. What's on your mind? Emma stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Victor, I need to tell you something. It's about the documents I found. Victor's brows furrowed, and he set his papers aside. Go on, he said, his voice calm but attentive. Emma took a deep breath. I ran into an old friend today, Mark. He said he saw Clarissa near the alley where I found your documents. He said she was acting suspiciously, like she was trying to get rid of something. I think she might have been the one who threw them away. Victor's face darkened, his eyes narrowing as he processed what she was saying. There was a long silence before he spoke. Are you certain about this, Emma? He asked, his voice low. Emma nodded. Mark wouldn't lie to me, Victor. He was sure it was her. Victor leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. The weight of the revelation seemed to settle over him, heavy and suffocating. He finally looked up at Emma, his expression grim. I'll look into it. Thank you for telling me, Emma. You did the right thing. Victor decided to hire a private investigator to get to the bottom of the situation. He couldn't ignore the suspicion that had taken root in his mind, and he needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Days passed, each one more tense than the last. Emma could feel the tension in the air, a quiet but unmistakable unease that seemed to permeate the mansion. Finally, the investigator returned with his findings. Victor called Emma into his study, his face pale but composed. Emma, I think you should hear this, he said, gesturing for her to sit. The investigator cleared his throat, his voice steady as he spoke. We reviewed footage from the area and spoke with a few locals. It seems Mrs. Clarissa was indeed seen discarding items in the alley where the documents were found. Based on the timing and the witness accounts, it's highly likely she intended for those documents to be lost permanently. Emma glanced at Victor, her heart aching at the pain etched across his features. He turned to the investigator. Thank you. That will be all, he said, his voice strained. After the investigator left, Victor sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the floor. Emma hesitated, then spoke softly. Victor, I'm so sorry. Victor looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of hurt and determination. Clarissa said she felt trapped in our marriage, he murmured. She wanted out, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. He took a deep breath, his expression hardening. Thank you, Emma. At least now I know the truth. Emma nodded, her heart heavy. She knew that this discovery would change everything, but she hoped that, somehow, it would lead to a better future. For both of them. Victor was devastated by Clarissa's betrayal. It wasn't just the act of discarding the documents. It was a realization that the person he had trusted and built a life with had harbored such resentment towards him. The pain was overwhelming, but Victor knew he had to make a decision. He couldn't stay married to someone who had deceived him so deeply. With a heavy heart, Victor informed Clarissa of his decision to end their marriage. The conversation was tense, filled with anger, hurt, and regret. Clarissa, unable to contain her rage, packed her belongings and left the mansion, her departure echoing with a sense of finality that left the entire household in turmoil. Through it all, Victor kept his promise to Emma. Despite his own emotional turmoil, he remained steadfast in his commitment to her. He found solace in his role as her protector, and he made sure she understood that she was not to blame for anything that had happened. More than that, he reassured her that she was now part of his family. Emma, he said one evening as they sat in the garden, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the sky. You didn't cause any of this. You brought me the truth, and for that, I am grateful. You're part of my family now, and I will always be here for you. Emma nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She had never had anyone say those words to her before, and they filled her with a sense of belonging she had never known. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere, like she had a home. Determined to make the most of this new opportunity, Emma decided to focus on her education. She had always dreamed of going to school, of learning, of making something of herself, but life on the streets had never allowed her the chance. When she confided in Victor about her dreams, he was nothing but supportive. Then let's make it happen, he said with a smile. I'll hire tutors to help you catch up, and we'll start looking into colleges. You deserve the chance to follow your dreams, Emma. And so, the following weeks were filled with a new sense of purpose. Victor hired private tutors, and every day, Emma found herself in the mansion study, poring over textbooks and learning things she had never thought she would have the chance to learn. Math, literature, science. Subjects that once seemed so distant were now at her fingertips, and she embraced every moment of it. The tutors were patient, kind, and encouraging, and Emma found herself thriving in this environment of support. Victor, too, found a renewed sense of purpose in helping Emma. He would often join her in the study, sitting across the table as she worked, offering guidance when she needed it and listening as she excitedly shared what she had learned that day. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Victor found comfort in the simplicity of those moments. Watching Emma's eyes light up as she understood a new concept, seeing her confidence grow as she made progress. Meanwhile, the household adjusted to the absence of Clarissa. The tension that had once filled the mansion seemed to dissipate, replaced by a quieter, more peaceful atmosphere. The staff, who had always been wary of Clarissa's temper, seemed more at ease, and they treated Emma with warmth and kindness. Slowly, the mansion began to feel less like a cold, opulent structure and more like a true home. One day, as Emma was sitting in the garden with her books spread out around her, Victor approached her with a thoughtful expression. He sat down beside her, his gaze sweeping over the flowers that swayed gently in the breeze. "Emma," he began, his voice soft, "I've been thinking a lot about the future. I know you're focused on your studies right now, but I want you to know that whatever path you choose, I will support you, whether it's college, a job, or something else entirely. I want you to follow your heart." Emma looked at Victor, her eyes filled with gratitude. I never thought I'd have the chance to even think about a future," she admitted. "But now, with you, I feel like anything is possible." Victor smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Anything is possible, Emma. You're capable of so much more than you realize." The days turned into weeks, and Emma continued to grow and flourish. She applied to a few local colleges, her heart pounding with both excitement and fear as she filled out the applications. Victor was by her side every step of the way, encouraging her, reassuring her, and reminding her that no matter the outcome, he was proud of her. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Emma held it in her hands, her fingers trembling as she looked at the return address. One of the colleges she had applied to. Victor stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Open it," he said gently. Emma took a deep breath, carefully tearing open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the letter, and then suddenly they widened. A smile spread across her face, and she looked up at Victor, her eyes shining with tears. "I got in," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief and joy. "I got in." Victor's face broke into a broad smile, and he pulled her into a hug. "I knew you would," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you, Emma." Emma hugged him back tightly, her heart overflowing with gratitude and happiness. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a future, a real future, filled with possibilities. And she knew that no matter what happened, she would never be alone again. She had a family now, and that made all the difference. The aftermath of Clarissa's betrayal had brought pain and turmoil, but it had also brought new beginnings. Victor and Emma, both wounded in their own ways, had found solace in each other. They had built something beautiful out of the wreckage, a bond that was stronger than blood, forged through trust, kindness, and hope for a better tomorrow. As the days turned into weeks, Victor and Emma's bond grew stronger. The once awkward relationship between a young woman who had stumbled into his life and a man who was struggling with the pain of betrayal transformed into something beautiful. Victor found joy in being a mentor and father figure to Emma, and Emma blossomed under his guidance and support. They created new routines together. Morning walks in the garden where they talked about anything that came to mind, cooking simple meals in the kitchen, and reading in the cozy library during the late hours of the night. One particular evening, as the sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, Victor and Emma sat on the balcony, sipping tea and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was still and warm, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had slowed down. Victor glanced at Emma, a gentle smile on his face. "You know, Emma, you've brought light into my life during a very dark time," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "I want you to know that you are like a daughter to me now." Emma's eyes welled with tears, her heart swelling with emotion. She turned to face him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Victor. You've given me a chance I never thought I'd have. You've shown me what it's like to be part of a family." Victor smiled, reaching out to place a comforting hand on her shoulder. They sat in silence for a while, the bond between them stronger than ever. In that moment, both of them knew that they were no longer just two strangers brought together by a twist of fate. They were family. Emma worked hard with her tutors, dedicating herself to her studies with a level of focus she never knew she had. Each day was a new opportunity to learn, to grow, to become the person she had always dreamed of being. And Victor was there every step of the way, cheering her on, reminding her of her potential, and encouraging her when she felt overwhelmed. His unwavering support gave her the confidence to dream bigger. One evening, after a long day of studying, Victor surprised Emma with a small celebration. He had prepared her favorite dish, spaghetti with homemade marinara sauce, and even baked a cake. The dining room table was decorated with candles and flowers, and Emma's eyes widened in surprise as she walked in. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. Victor smiled warmly. "Tonight, we're celebrating you, Emma. You've worked so hard, and I want to remind you just how proud I am of everything you've accomplished." Emma's heart swelled, and she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever celebrated her before. No one had ever taken the time to acknowledge her efforts or her dreams. She sat down at the table, her heart full as she looked at Victor. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Victor raised his glass, and Emma did the same. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "To new beginnings," Emma echoed, her smile bright. The days continued to pass, and with each one, Emma grew more confident. She began to think seriously about her future, about what she wanted to do and who she wanted to become. She had always dreamed of going to college, but it had seemed like an impossible goal, something reserved for people who had lives far different from her own. But now, with Victor's encouragement, she dared to dream again. One afternoon, as they sat in the garden, Emma turned to Victor, her eyes filled with determination. "I want to go to college," she said, her voice steady. "I want to study, to learn more, to make something of myself." Victor's face broke into a broad smile, and he nodded. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Emma, and you know I'll support you every step of the way. Whatever you need, we'll make it happen." With Victor's help, Emma began the process of applying to colleges. They spent countless hours going over applications, writing essays, and gathering all the necessary documents. It was a daunting task, but Emma faced it with courage, knowing she wasn't alone. Victor was always there, offering guidance, sharing his own experiences, and reminding her that no matter what happened, he was proud of her. One day, a letter arrived. Emma's hands trembled as she held the envelope, her heart pounding in her chest. Victor stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Open it," he said softly, his eyes filled with encouragement. Emma took a deep breath and carefully tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the letter, and then suddenly they widened. A smile spread across her face, and she looked up at Victor, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. "I got in," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I got in." Victor let out a whoop of joy and pulled Emma into a hug. "I knew you would," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so proud of you, Emma." Emma hugged him back tightly, her heart overflowing with gratitude and happiness. For the first time in her life, she felt like she had a future, a real future, filled with possibilities. And she knew that no matter what happened, she would never be alone again. She had a family now, and that made all the difference. As the weeks passed, preparations for Emma's transition to college began. Victor helped her shop for everything she would need: books, supplies, even some new clothes. They made a day of it, laughing and joking as they went from store to store. It was a day filled with joy, and for Emma, it was yet another reminder of how far she had come. The night before she was set to leave for college, Victor and Emma sat in the living room, a quiet sense of anticipation hanging in the air. Victor handed Emma a small wrapped box, his eyes warm. "What's this?" Emma asked, her fingers brushing against the wrapping paper. "Just a little something for you," Victor said with a smile. "Open it." Emma carefully unwrapped the box, revealing a beautiful silver necklace with a small pendant shaped like a heart. Her breath caught in her throat, and she looked up at Victor, her eyes misty. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Victor smiled, his eyes filled with love. "It's a reminder, Emma. No matter where you go or what you do, you'll always have a place here. You're part of my family, and I want you to always remember that." Emma felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you, Victor, for everything. You've changed my life." Victor shook his head, his smile soft. "No, Emma, you changed your own life. I just gave you a little help along the way." The next morning, Victor drove Emma to her new dormitory. The car was filled with her belongings, and Emma's heart was filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. When they arrived, they unloaded her things, and Victor helped her carry them up to her room. Once everything was settled, Victor turned to Emma, his eyes misty. "You're going to do great things, Emma. I know it." Emma hugged him tightly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I'll make you proud, Victor. I promise." Victor smiled, pulling back to look at her. "You already have, Emma. More than you know." As Victor drove away, Emma stood at the window of her dorm room, watching until his car disappeared from sight. She took a deep breath, a smile spreading across her face. This was it. A new beginning, a chance to build the life she had always dreamed of. Victor and Emma had both faced their share of pain and loss, but together they had built something beautiful. A bond that went beyond blood. A bond forged through kindness, trust, and love. And as Emma turned to face her future, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them. Because she wasn't alone anymore. She had a family, and that made all the difference. This story reminds us of the power of kindness, empathy, and the bonds we can form even in the most unexpected circumstances. Emma's courage to ask for something beyond material wealth, and Victor's willingness to open his heart to a stranger transformed both their lives for the better. They proved that family is not just about blood, but about love, support, and acceptance. The connection that grew between Victor and Emma serves as a beautiful reminder that even in the midst of loss and betrayal, new beginnings are possible. By choosing to be there for one another, they found hope, healing, and a true sense of belonging. Their journey shows us that when we open our hearts to others, we create the possibility of change, not just for ourselves, but for those around us as well. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Life Story 999 for more inspiring content. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more incredible stories to you. Thank you, and see you in the next story.